Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The time is just gone. 1 minute past 7 p.m. Central African time as we welcome you to another edition of Wednesday Nights with Inayat Wadi. We're coming to you on the various platforms of Salam Media and also on the YouTube channel, our Facebook page, and also we welcome our listeners at ITV who has joined the broadcast this evening. Now, two issues we are talking about this evening on the show. The first hour dedicated to Eskom, and the question we are raising this evening: with the power crisis, is a national disaster looming in South Africa? The situation at this point in time dire. We've seen rolling load shedding taking place, and last week, just before the election, we heard from the president: vote ANC, otherwise you will not get electricity. Now, there are so many issues that are playing out as far as Eskom is concerned, and the country as a whole is actually baying for blood. And huge question marks have been raised with regard to power and the power problem that we are faced in the country. Now, joining me tonight on the panel discussion is Machela Coco, who is the former CEO at Eskom, and we're also joined by David Nichols, chairman of NECSA, which is the South African Nuclear Energy Corporation. And looking ahead at the screen, I see both my guests have joined us. Machela Coco, good evening to you and welcome to the show.
Good evening, Inayat, and good evening to your viewers, and good evening to my colleagues, Mr. Nichols.
Yes, Mr. Nichols, good evening to you as well, and wonderful that you are able to join us.
Well, good evening. I'm very happy to be here. I will comment before you start that although I'm currently chair of NECSA, which you introduced me as, I've actually did 34 years at Eskom before I retired of old age in 2018. So I've also got an Eskom background as well.
Well, I think obviously you're 34 years at Eskom now. Perhaps we should just start off with you and looking at your 34 years at Eskom in terms of what we've experienced and looking at the last 10 to 15 years, particularly in terms of Eskom and how the power generation unit has basically got to the situation where we are, because we knew at some point in time, South Africa, we always boasted to have the cheapest electricity in the world, and looking at where we were at that point in time and how have we got here in the first place.
Okay, well, I take it back a lot further than most people do. I sit here and say that in the mid-1990s, Eskom overbuilt power stations in the in the mid-80s because we were building power stations with a 14-year lead time. That's the time from decision to build the station to the last machine of 6 being online, against an incredibly high growth rate in demand back in the late 1970s, very early 80s of about 10% a year. And we had overbuilt. And so when the growth rate slowed down in the early 1980s, we overbuilt massively. Eskom then in the mid-1990s was saying, we're going to need to have more power by about 2007. And at that point, the world economy was saying, the future is the free market. The free market will solve all your problems. And Eskom was told in the late 1990s not to build more power stations. The free market would do so. And that's a fundamental flaw, because I'm afraid the free market, when we talk about the renewable industry today, it's not a free market. It's being given sovereign guarantees to provide power more expensive than Eskom's power. And Eskom then ended up shutting down its new build program, shutting down its project management organization, and went away and said, okay, we'll run the present plant, we'll wait for the rest of the plant. And surprisingly enough, in 2004, late 2004, Alec Erwin said to Eskom, as then the Minister of DPE, said, Eskom said that we're going to, your 98 energy policy says we're going to run out of power in 2007. Is that true? And Eskom said, yeah, dead on track for 2007. And then Alec Erwin said, well, who's building power stations to match that need? And Eskom said, not us. We've been told not to. We've been explicitly told not to build new power stations. And Alec Erwin then said, well, who is building? And the answer is nobody. So then was when we started the crash program of Medupi and Kasili. We went from, and I'm sure Marcello knows more than I because he was involved in the engineering side of that. Those days I was still deep into the nuclear team. We went, roughly speaking, about 24 months from decision to go from no plans to build new power stations to we are on site on the biggest construction project on earth in about 24 months. So by 2007, we're busy building. And 2007, the lights went out. And they've stayed out essentially since then. So that's the background to the whole thing, going back in my history. And I think it's also important to understand that people talk about demand of power. They say the supply doesn't meet the demand at the moment. That's not true. Since 2007, Eskom has run all its machines flat out because we've not had enough machines to meet the requirement. So I say we because I'm still talking about Eskom as we, although I've left it a couple of years ago. And so essentially since 2006, 2007, we've no longer seen any discussion of what demand really is. We've only seen what the supply capacity is. And that's hurt the economy because anyone building new plant, new industrial plant, new smelters has said, don't build them, there's no power. Sorry, you asked me a background question, Inyet, and I tried my best to give you a simple answer. There are no simple
thank
answers.
You for that, David. Thank you very much. And obviously to bring Marcello into the discussion and obviously looking at your tenure as the CEO of Eskom and being the former CEO and just looking at the point in time when you had taken over at Eskom and progressively what had transpired so that we are in the situation where we are at this point in time, Marcello.
You know, what Dave just said, and Mr. Inyet, I call him Dave. I know I should be calling him Mr. Nichols. But that's because I have a relationship with him, so it's not disrespect that I call him Dave. Just
I used to call you sir, and I've accused you on radio of being the most difficult boss I've ever worked for because you were painful at times.
Yeah. So what Dave just said is quite important because we ran out of peaking capacity in 2007 and we ran out of baseload capacity in 2010. And we knew that was going to happen and we were not listened to. At the end, we were accused that we did not make noise loud enough. So we had an energy plan. We call it then ISEP, Integrated Supply Electricity Plan at that time. We were not listened to. What really worries me is that we're making the same mistakes. So we will be sitting here in 10 years' time and we will look back and say, we had an electricity plan. Whether I agree with it or not, we do have a what we call now Integrated Resource Plan 2019 that informs the electricity needs of the country up until 2013. But we're not implementing that. We're busy with too many things. The integrated resource plan as we have it now, and I have views for it, but my views are irrelevant. The integrated resource plan of 2019 is the plan for the country. And the plan for the country simply says this. We are going to build every year 1,000 megawatt of solar PV every year, and we are going to build 1,600 megawatt of wind technology every year, and we're going to build between now and 2025 1,000 megawatt of gas plant. The big assumption there is that Eskom must operate at the energy availability factor of 75%. Now, if Eskom operates at an energy availability factor of 75%, and we build total renewables every year of 2,600 megawatts, and we deploy 1,000 megawatts of solar, we should not be in crisis. But what is happening right now is that we have government has said to the private sector, we no longer can put our eggs in one basket called Eskom. Therefore, the customers can build up to 100 megawatts. We don't need a license, so you can do what you want. But we will build car power, and anybody can do what he wants. And we've got 2,000 of emergency generation. So we have an amorphous mess. We have an integrated resource plan on one side, and then anybody can do what he likes on the other side. I think this is an indictment, and we're going to sit back in 10 years' time and look back and say, we have disappointed the nation, our children into the future. We should have a plan. We have current plan, integrated resource 2019. It must be updated every 2 years, and we must work the plan. You know, the Dave used to work for me, and I used to tell him, Dave, have the plan, however imperfect the plan is. Once you have the plan, work the plan, and if you don't work the plan that you have, I will fire you. Somebody has to say that to the decision makers in the country. Have an electricity resource plan for the country and work that plan. And if you don't work that plan, we fire you as the consumers. We are heading for the crisis. We are heading for the crisis. What is happening right now is that people have woken up. I mean, in 2015, the amount of unsaved energy was 1.3 gigawatt hours. In 2015. In 2016, the amount of unsaved energy was zero. 2017 was zero. Between 2018 and today, I just worked it out before I came on studio, was 5.2 gigawatt hours. Now that's a total cost, and this is not a joke, of 348 billion rand loss to the economy, that nobody wants to confront it. It's a crisis.
Well, certainly, Machela, and also David, looking at or just listening to what Machela is saying, on the one hand, there is clearly a conflict because when we're talking about a free-for-all, we're talking about not being listened to, and also about the integrated resource plan. It is clear that there is more to Eskom and its trouble, and again, new question marks at this point in time in terms of the political governance of Eskom.
If I may, I think that the assumption about the impact of lack of capacity, I want to be quite clear. We have no idea what demand, well, we have an idea what demand should be at the moment if we had stayed as we were. The problem we're sitting with is that we've got three people at the table. We've got Eskom, we've got the government planners, and we've got the free market. And the assumption is that in the model, there was an allocation to the free market to say, you will build all this plant and you'll keep it going and everything will be wonderful. Eskom, shut up, keep quiet. The trouble that we've got is the free market doesn't actually bother about the plan. And wider than that, so that they don't see a need. So if I go back to the earlier terms, and I'm sorry, I think we've got to understand that the response time of the power supply industry to a change in policy is normally about 15 years. If you say today we're going to change the policy in the country, then in the long term, it'll take 15 years for that to work through. We've seen that on Medupi and Kasili. People like natural gas being quick. It's not true because you need the gas infrastructure. So the gas turbine is quick to build, but the infrastructure is a challenge. And we're seeing the response 15 years later. So the problem we've got now is the free market is not coming to the table. And everybody is saying that because we aren't using power, we don't really need any more power. We need to maintain the present fleet. Well, the problem I've got is that that's not true. If you look at the 3.4% year-on-year growth rate from 1982 to 2007, if that had gone on until today, we'd now be at about 55 to 60,000 megawatts demand, which is, roughly speaking, twice what we've got. And that's GDP that we've lost. That's heavy industry. This country is not into, we're not in the, for all the discussion, we're not in the IR4. That's, the fourth industrial revolution is great. We are not in there. We are in the mining, heavy industry, processing industry, maybe manufacturing. That has collapsed. It's collapsed because we haven't had the power to feed it. When you've turned around to someone like Anglo American and said, I want you to build a new plant. If someone in Anglo American was putting forward a proposal to put a new energy intensive plant in South Africa, unless that plant was absolutely linked to mining on the ground, it wouldn't happen. And I'll put a thought to you, which is a central thought. When I joined, I'm an immigrant. I came in '84 to this country to join Eskom. You know, when I arrived here, Telkom was a utility, and if Telkom had been going bankrupt and closing down, everyone would have said, "We've got a problem. I will not build in South Africa because I've got no telecoms." All right. People claim that the change in philosophy for power industry is the same as telecoms. And the reality is that if you today said, I'm going to bring a plant to a country with no telecoms infrastructure, nobody would worry about it. Because I know I can get telecoms through cell phone, through satellite, almost anything. So if you believe the industry has fundamentally changed and that the privates and that self-generation is the answer, then why is Eskom even a concern on the radar screen? If Telkom went bankrupt tomorrow, and I don't, the only guys who'd worry is guys who have a telecom contract, and I do, so that would worry me. But essentially, if Eskom goes bankrupt, the country goes to the wall. So the fundamental difference is that despite all the public statements about, oh, renewables have changed the world, the reality is you still need a state utility. And the assumption that the industry has fundamentally changed is, in my view, a fundamental mistake. Because if you believe that, then nobody worries about it. I'll give you an example if I can. If you go to north of us into Africa, farther in Africa, go to Kenya. And I heard, if you go to Kenya and you ask them about landlines for telephones, I'm going to guess they look at you and say, we don't care. We're entirely cell phone based. Change the world. We don't have landlines. But if you go there and say, I'm going to give you a better grid system, they'll say, yes, I'll talk to you. Why is that different? And the answer is that we're still basically running an old-fashioned grid because the technology has not really changed. The subsidies have, and other things have changed. But nobody subsidized cell phones in Africa. We're now busy self-subsidizing renewables because we know they're going to make sense one day. I'm afraid I'm an old-fashioned engineer. I live in the real world, and the real world says that. Oh, just another comment, just before I chat about you. Marcello mentioned about the fact about the IRPs. Well, it's worth bearing in mind the IRP 2010, the only element in the IRP 2010 that was implemented, the only one, was the renewables. The new gas, the new coal, the new nuclear was just shut down by the lobby groups who felt there was no money for it in them and everything. Sorry, I'm a bit of a rant there.
Yes, I think what's important, and also, Marcella, is Eskom has become a political hot potato in the country. And, we've seen political task teams, we've seen the Eskom war room. And the question that I had raised to David is the conflict that we are seeing at this point in time, and why Eskom has been conflicted is the political governance as far as Eskom is concerned, which has certainly turned out to be a nightmare. And it is clear that whatever tactics have been used, or the government, I know, David spoke about the free market, obviously, on the one hand, but the government is a major player. And for some reason or the other, these tactics, as far as the government is concerned, we can have all the plans in the world, we can have all the policies in the world, but practically something obviously has gone horribly wrong and it's not working out.
So, I hold the view that government has given up on Eskom. I hold the view that since 2018, certainly after I left Eskom in January, government has done anything and everything to try to sort out what they thought was a problem at Eskom, and they have not achieved the desired results. They are out of their wits, they're out of their depth. I don't think government knows what to do any longer, and you hear it in their messaging. Now the president starts, when he addresses people, he says, we can no longer put our eggs in one basket called Eskom. You hear the same thing from the Minister of Finance. Minister of Finance says, we are focused on Eskom for too long. We must now focus on the electricity, on the security of electricity supply. The last 2 days has been extremely bad messaging from Eskom. And if you're an Eskom employee, your morale will be down. You know, yesterday, the CEO of Eskom, the face of Eskom, comes out and say, in not so many words, Eskom is a dead horse. Today, he comes in and said, it does not worth to invest in an old car. So not only has government given up on Eskom, on fixing Eskom, but even the CEO of Eskom seems to have given up that Eskom as it is now cannot be fixed. Well, can be fixed. If the three of us are constitute this Eskom war room, or call it the electricity or energy war room, what would we recommend? And this is my submission. My submission is that the decarbonization is not a hoax. So the concept of global warming is not a hoax. It must be dealt with. So we have to decarbonize. But we also have to provide in the future security of electricity supply, and we cannot leave it to chance. But thirdly, both the decarbonization of the electricity sector in particular and the requirement for the security of supply must come at a cost and pace that the economy can afford. Now, those are the basics. Now, if you go to IRP 2019, when you have it, you must go to Figure 7. It provides the decommissioning roadmap for Eskom. So we currently have an installed base of 48,600 megawatt. By 2030, we will be down to 33,000 megawatt from coal. So there's a decommissioning plan. Whether you agree with it or not, I certainly don't, but it's a plan for the country that there's a decommissioning plan. So we must be pedantic and work that plan. But secondly, the same electricity plan for the country says build 2,600 megawatt of renewable technology every year. Do that. Stop wasting time. Thirdly, the plan says build 1,000 megawatt of gas by 2025. Do that. Stop wasting time. The plan also says start developing 2,500 megawatt of nuclear capacity that may be commercially available, commercially operating by 2032. Do that. Don't waste time. Once you've agreed to that, then you then say, what is the single other important variable we have not addressed? Then it's Eskom. So we must fix Eskom. We must fix Eskom to get to the 75% energy availability factor. And we must must not be good enough. We must not come second best. We have a plan, implement this plan. Every second year, implement this plan. We will never have a perfect plan, but what I know and what I've learned in my 30 years of association with Eskom is that when you have a plan and you work the plan, whatever imperfections, you are able to self-correct. All other things, quite frankly, are nonsensical. I don't know where the 100 megawatts without licensing fits into the electricity plan. I don't know. Dave, you must advise me. You may know better. Where does it fit into the electricity plan? I don't know where the 2,000 megawatts of emergency power generation fits into the electricity plan. We have an amorphous mess. We have poor leadership at an executive level. We have poor leadership because the security of supply must be led from the center at an executive level. And we're failing.
Yes, certainly. And also, I think I hear what you're saying, Marcella, that fixing Eskom is a challenge, and the messaging that is coming through from the executive tells me that this messaging is quite ominous at this point in time, and the question of wasting time. But also against all of this, David, and from what Marcella has
So,
actually
my
described
apologies.
as well.
My apologies, Nat. Let me just conclude this. There's a perception in government and in the private sector that says, you know what, we've been trying to fix Eskom and we're not winning. Forget about Eskom and build the IPP. That line is not in line or in sync with the current approved electricity plan for the country. And that's my point. So you have no bearing. You don't know what is the true north.
Yes, Marcella, and I think what you're saying obviously is the government being out of depth at this point in time, overwhelmed by the size or the nature of the problem at this point in time and what we are going through, and living in hope of fixing Eskom, considering what both of you are saying, David and Marcella, that, you know, at the end of the day, the situation is dire. The situation is to the point where some are now calling it a state of emergency and a national state of disaster, David.
Yeah, I mean, I said early on, I believe that you can actually make a case that the majority of economic problems are due to lack of power, because lack of power is lack of industry and so on. But I'll put a comment to you. What worries me is people talk about the 100 megawatts self-generation as being the answer. That's regularly put as the answer. And the problem with that is simple, is almost everyone is talking about putting PV on their site to provide that energy. Well, I hate to depress you all, but we're all sitting in the dark. I don't mean the dark as in load shedding. That's another discussion. I mean load shedding.
Well, I'm sitting in the dark right now. I've got plan B, actually. I'm experiencing load shedding as we speak.
Hey, I'm a simple engineer. I've got a 30 kVA dead diesel in my backyard that I bought in 2008 because I knew it was coming. But the answer to the question is that PV doesn't help you at night. So energy is not the issue. The issue is power when you want it 24/7. And so all the discussions about economics are based on the principle, so much per kilowatt hour. Well, we've tried, the government's gone out, and I hear, and I'm fully on Marcella's side in terms of have a plan and work the plan. We haven't done that. We're still not doing it now. But even if you take that aside, the reality is that as soon as you say to some industry, build your self-generation plant, they'll say, fine, but I still want the grid connection to Eskom when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing. And yet most of the cost of the power, of the energy we pay Eskom for, or the Munich, is in fact the cost of capacity, not a cost of energy. We're paying 2-3 rand a unit now for energy. By world standards, that's not too bad, by the way, for oil screen. But of that 2 to 3 rand, 40 cents is the price of the energy. That's the coal that someone's burning in a boiler. Something like 1 rand 60 to 2 rand 60 is the price of being able to turn the light switch on and it works. So in fact, what will happen is that Eskom is going to turn around, they're already doing it, and saying, if you want a connection to the grid and a peak capacity of X, I'll charge you most of your old bill. So in the same way as back in 2000 and 2003 time period, the IPP said we can't compete. People will not actually build those 100 megawatt machines. If Goldfields wants to build a 14 I think it's Goldfields, a 14 megawatt solar plant, that is great. And Eskom will say, we'll take the cable away and leave you alone. In other words, that's wonderful. I'm not sure you're going to run a gold mine with solar power, because when the sun goes down, the guys down the shaft get left there. They'll demand they link to Eskom, and Eskom will say, fine, 3/4 of our cost is the fixed cost of the system. Therefore, your bill can't go down. So some of the assumptions being made are fundamentally flawed. But the trouble we've got with those assumptions is those assumptions make a lot of money for industrial people, because building your PV plant makes lots of money. So the classical approach of we have a utility, which is a requirement, like roads, like sewage, like water. Electricity is a utility. not a commodity. You need it for the industry to survive, and you need to socialize it. I know it's not fashionable to be socialist, but essentially socializing means that you do it the best way for society rather than individuals. And then you turn around and say, what makes it work? But the present proposals being put forward have no meaning. When someone says to me, I'll give you an example. The bid window 5 came in at 40 cents a unit, really good prices by world standards. It's actually debatable that actually be to close the deals at that price. At the same time, we brought in the risk mitigation program, which is dispatchable power by any means you want to. And I know the power ships the cause measure. They come in at around R1.50 upwards. So there's 40 cents is the price of energy, free market. R1.50 plus is the price of electricity to your house on a dispatchable basis. And we're confusing apples and oranges all the time.
Yes, thank you for that, David. And just to bring Marcella back into the discussion. Now, Marcella, to look at what we have at this point in time and looking at the problems that we are faced with. We're talking about collapsing of grids. We're talking about planned maintenance that is not working out. We're talking about lack of technical expertise. We're talking of high costs that Eskom is incurring at this point in time, to the extent that some have turned it that we're in the grip of mafia-like tactics where the entire country is being held to ransom by Eskom, by sabotage and the like. And looking at what we have at this point in time, what should Eskom be doing?
Well, what's important now is that it's a realization that, and I can't emphasize this, and I've said it many times, and I'll not say it again, but we have an electricity plan that is multifaceted, and all the elements of the electricity plan must be implemented, both from Eskom side and new capacity side. I listened to the former Minister of Energy when he was asked what's going to happen. He says, no, we're going to build more IPPs and the problem will disappear. That's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation, if there is one thing, if I was a chairman of Eskom or I was Minister Pravin Gordhan, I will have only one conversation with the chairman of Eskom or the CEO of Eskom. And the conversation will go like this. And there will be no democracy in that discussion. And Mr. Nichols knows how I respond when I've made my mind. I'll say to him, we have an IRP. The IRP requires us to perform at 75% EAF. There is nothing that is more important to us as Eskom but to deliver to the country and to the nation an electricity and energy availability factor of 75%. That is our psychological compact with South Africans. Why would I go to Glasgow as a CEO of Eskom? It's got nothing to do with me. Glasgow is in the realm of the Department of Energy and Minerals and Energy. My job is to fix Eskom to be able to deliver energy at the energy availability factor of 75%. And if I'm the chairman or the Minister of Finance, that's what I will tell the CEO of Eskom. I will not discuss anything with you except the energy availability factor of 75%. That's your job. That's why you are employed by Eskom. And I will not accept any good excuses. So all what you just mentioned, Mr. Inayet, is good excuses. It's good excuses. I mean, I heard the story that says we do not have money to do maintenance, therefore we do not release outages on time. It takes 24 months to be outage ready. But because we don't have money, we therefore don't plan outage properly. Now, that's a very, very good excuse, because what is not being said there is that you do maintenance anyway. You either do it on a breakdown or on a plant. When the plant breaks, you don't say, I don't have money to fix the unplanned breakdown. And Dave, you know that very well. When you've got a tube leak, you don't say, I don't have money to fix the tube leak. You find the money to fix the tube leak. So why do you have the money to fix the plant on an unplanned, but you don't have money to fix the plant on a planned? We all know that a breakdown maintenance is more expensive than planned maintenance. So it is not a money issue, because the money is there to fix the plant when it's broken. We have an explosion, we have an incident at Medupi right now. It will come, the unit is off for 24 months, but it's been fixed. It's a breakdown maintenance. So the whole story that we do not have money to do maintenance, it's nonsense. It's a good excuse, because when the plant breaks, you find the money to fix it. So the rest is excuses. All the discussion that must be had with one man, the CEO of Eskom, is that stop living on the plane. Your job, this is how I will summarize his job. Your job is to give the country an energy availability factor of 75% at the cost that NERSA has given us, with zero harm. Zero harm to the plant, zero harm to the environment, and zero harm to our reputation. That's your job. Give South Africans energy availability factor of 75% within the cost of NERSA, at zero harm to the environment, at zero harm to our people, at zero harm to the plant, and at zero harm to our reputation. And if you fail to do that, leave. But before you leave my office, write a resignation letter. Don't date it, but sign it. That's what is missing.
Yes, Machela, and I just want David's comments on this as well, because it is clear we are in a critical situation and it is calling for drastic measures. Now, there was hope when Andre de Ruyter was appointed as the CEO of Eskom. There was talk about the breakup of Eskom into 3 entities, and nothing seems to have materialized. And David, just looking at your experience and the time that you've been at Eskom as well, in terms of the skills base, in terms of expertise, in terms of having that the understanding and being in touch with what is happening at Eskom. And Machela spoke about planned, about unplanned maintenance, and clearly it tells me that somewhere along the line, these are basic issues. These are day-to-day issues that Eskom is experiencing problems with.
I'm going to put a different comment, if I may. I'll come back to you in a second with that thing, but I put a comment to you, which is what scares me of the last 2 days. And there's 2 very specific comments. I've worked on plants that are old and plants that are new. Life is, you learn to live with these things. But when somebody says, I don't believe I can achieve something, he normally doesn't. And the problem that I have at the moment is that people are turning around and saying the old coal stations are unrecoverable and therefore we must move on. And that has 2 problems. The first thing is it tells all the people on the power stations that they have no chance. And if you come to the office in the morning and someone says there is no chance of success, just sit down and do your job, you tend not to be too enthusiastic. Morale is an indicator. I can almost track availability of plant against morale in the organization. And that is really, to me, a very worrying situation when you start turning around and saying, we are not going to make it. And that, to me, is central. If there's no plan that people believe in, if the people in the organization don't believe in the plan, and I'll use an example very close to my home at the moment, which is when I came into Nexa, and we've got all kinds of problems at Nexa, I came in January 2000. And I was told almost immediately that if we didn't have 200 million rand of cash infusion by March, we couldn't pay salaries. And that was pretty serious. And I said, I'm not interested. We can't get the money. We've got to make a plan to make it work. We are now literally nearly 2 years later. We have not stopped paying salaries, and we survived through COVID. All kinds of problems, not saying it's simple. But if I'd gone in on that first day and said, I accept we cannot make it work, how do we close the company down? We would have closed Nexa down, and it would have been the end of Nexa. Same thing at Eskom. If you go to a power station, I saw numbers recently. I mean, the idea that Tutuka, which is a reasonably middle-aged power station, it hasn't yet got to the point of 50 years old, and therefore you can question it, at a 34% availability. I have to ask the question, what is wrong? And if you go to that power station, I will guarantee you the morale is completely shot. And it's less a question of skills than of morale. Clearly, if you've got no skills, you've got a problem. But to me, the skills in the organization are still enough skills in Eskom to make it happen. But I worry a lot when I hear stories in the press, and I don't know anything in detail, but I saw in the press that Eskom is saying people are resigning from Kuba, which is a station I used to run, without another job to go to, on the belief they will get another job. That worries me, because that means the morale is not there. And that, I think, is the biggest issue in Eskom. And the comments that we've got a dead horse or you don't repair broken cars, I don't buy it. I'm sorry. Those worry me as philosophical views, because that, however good your plant is, and the basic Eskom plants are pretty good plants. They run pretty well. They've achieved high availabilities. They've been successful in the past. And I'll even say with Medupi and Kasili, yes, it was the first machines were built in a screaming hurry after a 20-year hiatus, and it had all kinds of problems. But it's interesting to note the fact that Medupi's availability is more than twice that of Kasili's. And if you look at the classical reliability engineering model, you find that when you first build something, you get a burn-in time when things go wrong at the beginning, like when you buy a cell phone, they say 7-day replacement. And then you have a long period of stability when the plant's really reliable. Then you have a gentle degradation into old age when it starts falling apart on you. Your car has that situation at the end. And all we're seeing in Medupi Kasili is a horrendous early burn-in problems, but they'll fix them up. They're fundamentally good stations. But I will put the comment that says that if you tell people they're going to fail, they probably will. And that's the fear we felt at Eskom now. You've got to have a management team that says, we can succeed. And what is missing, as I'm not yet seeing it, is you've in any recovery, if I look at Salam Media, I will guarantee you've got 3 plans. You may not realize you've got one plan of how to run the present organization. You've got a vision of where you'll be in 5 years' time. And that's plan 2. You've got a transition plan to go from where you are now to where you want to be in 5 years' time. If you haven't got those 3 plans, you cannot be going forward. And I have not yet seen the plan of where we are with a zero carbon grid in 2050. Because natural gas isn't useful to us. It isn't zero carbon. It's a long way from it. And so we've got a situation where we appear to be abandoning the current plan. In other words, I'm not going to worry about the present plan. We've got to transition to somewhere we don't know where it is. That's what worries me at the moment about the psychology we're looking at. I mean,
Thank you for that, David.
Sure.
I just want Michela to come in now. Michela, obviously, when one looks at the economics of what has happened at Eskom, is we've seen bailout after bailout to the point where Eskom is the biggest headache for the country economically as well. But the key issue here is going forward, and there is all this talk about IPPs. And just want your thoughts on IPPs. What are some of the challenges that IPPs are likely to have? And also at the same time, in terms of, are we able to fast track the situation where we can get to a situation where we've got the necessary capacity, or we've built the necessary capacity to service the needs of the country's energy needs and electricity needs?
Mr. Nichols made a reference to IRP 2010. In the cheapest or the least cost option in 2010 was not renewable technologies. It was actually nuclear and coal. We took a strategic decision. It was a policy adjustment in IRP 2010 to include renewables because we wanted to develop them, give them a chance to grow, to go through the learning curves, because we knew that if we are successful, the prices will come down. And our assumption that we took in 2010 to make a policy adjustment to the IRP of 2010 to include the renewables then paid off. We have a legacy issues of between the 1.2 to 3.5 that we must deal with. But that's a topic of a different discussion. But the fact is, the pursuant and the consequences of the policy decision we made in 2010 is that renewables are much cheaper now. I mean, Dave just talked about 37 cents per kilowatt hour for between the 5. Whether you can bank them or not, it's neither here nor there. Let's assume you can bank them. So where I'm sitting is that we have been successful to provide an opportunity for renewable technologies, and they must be dispatched. 1, 2, we have an integrated resource plan. The integrated resource plan does not prescribe who must build the future capacity. It is the ministerial determination that decides who build what. And my view is that once you have a workable integrated resource plan that takes into account the energy mix that will provide security of supply into the future, decarbonize the electricity sector, provide the costs that can support the economic development, that both the private sector and Eskom must share the burden of keeping the lights on into the future. So I see the scope for both public and the private sector in the electricity provision into the future. What makes the private sector or the IPP program more attractive today, and I work cross-border on IPP myself, and I work cross-border. What distinguishes the IPP program in South Africa is the sovereign support that the government gives to the South African IPP program, the contingent liabilities. Now, I hold the view that there is a limit for the fiscus to continue providing contingent liabilities to make the IPPs very attractive. So at one point in time, the fiscus is going to come back and say, listen, guys, we can't afford this. We just can't afford this. So it's a window of opportunity that is available now, but that window of opportunities is not going to be open forever because the fiscus is constrained. The fiscus cannot continue with the current contingent liabilities in its books as we have them. And granted, the contingent liabilities are not liabilities. They are contingent in the event that Eskom as a single buyer will not perform, or the future of single buyer, which is the systems and market operator and the transmission grid. Having said that, let me say this. No amount of bailout is going to save Eskom. Bailout, as we currently have it, is nothing else but a subsidy for between the 1 to 3.5. That's all. The consequences of the current electricity policy that is amorphous, that is bad, is that the Eskom sales will continue to decline. And for as long as the Eskom sales continue to decline, Eskom assets remains unattractive. So you have a serious problem here that must be dealt with, that is not being looked at. That you cannot have the future for Eskom whose sales volume continue to decline at the rate of 2 to 3% per annum. The only reason why Eskom revenue is increasing is because of the tariff. It's not because of the sales, it's not because it's selling more of its product. And such a pricing model is not sustainable. And the way the regulatory pricing regime works is that if Eskom does not meet its sales volume, you throw back through the regulatory clearing account. So the electricity inflation will continue to increase in my view, at nothing less than 15% every year. Now, when the Eskom tariff increases by a minimum of 15% every year, it becomes expensive for the people in Soweto and Alexander and Cape Flats. What do? They can't afford electricity. They go back to wood. They go back to coal. You then start to exclude thousands of the masses of our people that lives in the township because they can't afford. But not only do you exclude them, but because of your electricity inflation, then it becomes more competitive for me who lives in Sandton to put my solar panels on top of my roof. And then you are forced on a death spiral for Eskom. But Eskom can't die because the electricity plan says it must perform at 75% energy availability factor. So you have all these things that are working against each other, simply because the center does not hold. One author in Africa said so. When the center does not hold, you've got a amorphous mess. And that's where we are.
Yes, David, just looking at global players, as far as addressing South Africa's energy requirements go. And we've heard about the Russians in the past. We've heard about nuclear energy. We know about the Turkish company as well. So there has been a keen interest in South Africa and our energy problems in this country. And I'd just like your thoughts in terms of opportunities for other players to enter the market to address the energy problem that we have in this country.
I think be careful when you bring other players in. There are two simple problems, but their outcome is pretty complex. The first is that anyone investing money in a plant, and you can say lending money to a project, the same thing, is looking for return on their investment. And any economist will tell you that the base price of debt in a country is the cost of sovereign debt. Everything gets added to that. So if I say I'm going to go out and do a project as the state, and I'm going to raise the money on the sovereign balance sheet, I will end up with, at the moment, this country, an interest rate of, let's say, 6% inflation and 9% cost of capital. As soon as I become an external player, I want my return to be better than that. Because if I just want that return, I might as well buy South African government bonds. So the interest rate on any project will be more expensive than state debt. And the next problem is that because the power industry is linked to the infrastructure of the country, you need to guarantee that your tariff that goes with your debt is guaranteed. So you will require some form of sovereign guarantee on your tariff. And these two things together mean that everyone will climb in and offer to do it at the price that makes sense to them. And it's a fundamental problem that you've got lots of money in the world. The world is currently awash with capital. The amount of capital injected into the world economy by the first world following COVID means that interest rates in most of the world are at zero in real terms. So there's lots of money out there to invest in new projects, but they will require a higher interest rate and they will require the guarantees to go with it. And that's the problem we've got with those. So yes, we can acquire a new plant. We can certainly fund any credible new build project should be fundable against the PPA, against the power purchase agreement. But they will require the PPA to be guaranteed. And they will require more return than they would have in their parent company at home, because they don't trust foreigners, and we're foreigners to them.
Thank you for that, David. I see we've got about 4 minutes, and going to you, Machela, once again. Just final thoughts, and we are in a crisis situation, and looking ahead, the signs are not good. The signs are ominous, and just in the immediate future, just final thoughts. Is there opportunity to do some damage control so that we don't get to a stage where we have a complete collapse as a result of Eskom?
Yes, there's an opportunity. First, we must accept that the country has got an electricity plan. And that electricity plan is the IRP 2019. That plan says we must build 2,600 megawatts of renewable technologies per year. 1,000 of megawatt of that must be solar, 1,600 of that must be wind, and we must build 1,000 megawatts of gas by 2025. It also says Eskom must perform at an energy availability factor of 75%. So the new build part of the program must continue, and government must be pedantic, and it must work that plan. But when you work that plan and you don't fix the other input to the electricity plan, which is Eskom, and then you are working backward. You are making making one step forward and 2 steps backward. Having said that, this is the conversation I will say if I'm the minister of, if I'm Pravin Gordhan, this is the conversation I will have with Andre Directors. Mr. Directors, our job is to deliver on the electricity plan of the country. The electricity plan of the country wants us to deliver 75% energy availability factor at the cost delivered by NERSA, with zero harm to the environment, zero harm to the plant, zero harm to the people of Eskom, and zero harm to the reputation of Eskom. That's your job, nothing else. Stop going to Glasgow. Stop doing any other thing. The only conversation you must have with me is how are you going to deliver 75% of energy availability factor that is required by the integrated resource plan within the cost of NERSA with zero harm across the board. That must only be the conversation that underwriters must have. Underwriters must stop saying Eskom is a dead horse. Underwriters must stop saying you can't fix an old car. It's his job to fix it. Otherwise, he must write his resignation letter. He must not date it. He must sign it, and I will sign it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Machela. David, final thoughts from your side, about 2 minutes.
Yeah, I came again. You've got to have a plan for the present, a plan for transition, and a plan for the end point. And I disagree slightly with Machela in terms of the IRP. I know it's the document must be a plan, but I'm not but we must first of all define accurately what the end point where we're going to be in 2040, 2050, and work towards that. It's a long-term industry. And that plan must be credible. It mustn't just be we hope something will work that doesn't work now. We must then have a plan to make the current plant work as it should work. Yes, the plant is old, but it is not a reason to abandon it. We need to get, exactly as Michelle was saying, we need to get the plant availability up into the 70s. And then we need to have a credible transition plan to go from here to there. A good example is natural gas. We may need natural gas to support that transition, but we must understand what it's doing and how it's fitting into the plan. You can't have those 3 things separately. And at the moment, they appear to be doing a transition plan till they're not quite sure where we're going to, along with we're not really worrying about the current because we've lost faith in the current plant. You can't be in that situation. You've got to have those 3 arms. And exactly as Machela says, we've got to get the current availability of plant up. You can run a Model T Ford as your daily car. It is very painful, but you can do it. And many people run old cars, and the power stations are not, they've got age problems, but that should not be as dramatic as it is now.
Well, David Nichols and Machela Coco, we thank you, gentlemen, for taking time out and being with us, part of the panel discussion on Wednesday nights with myself, Inayat Wadi, here on Salam Media. We wish you all the best. We appreciate, we thank you for your time.
Thank you and good evening.
Yeah, thank you and good night.
Well, that brings us to the end of part one of tonight's discussion on Wednesday nights with myself, Inayat Wadi. We come back from 8 to 9. We're going to be talking with author Dr. Abdul Qadir Al-Junaid and talking about his book, Prison in Sana'a. We're talking about Yemen. And this is quite interesting because the book talks about the most horrible thing, worse than death, is being in jail. In between a place that is not quite home for a time, that is not defined as a refugee, not knowing when will end, and obviously fearing the worst all the time. So when we come back, we'll be joined by author Dr. Abdul Qadir Al-Junaid.